Good morning, Republicans. I'm here with Jack Tomarchio, who's going to answer some of your questions that you posted on our Facebook and Twitter pages last night during the President's State of the Union. Thank you to everybody who asked a question, and here's Jack.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Good morning, everybody. Um, my name is Jack Tomarchio. I'm the principal of a company called the Agogi Group. It's located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I do a lot of strategic analysis in the national security area. Formerly, I was the principal deputy undersecretary of Homeland Security from 2005 until 2008 under President George W. Bush. At the Department of Homeland Security, my principal job was working with threat intelligence regarding threats to the homeland and evaluating those threats to see whether they were real threats or whether they were obviously not real. And we were very busy during those 3 years to try and protect the homeland. And prior to that, I also served a number of years in the United States Army, retired as a colonel in 2011. Well, that's a great question, and I think Governor Haley is right. We are, facing a very multifaceted terrorist threat. It's a different terrorist threat than we faced on 9/11 back in 2001, where we had one essential bad actor, one enemy, which was Al Qaeda, that was trying to cause disruption and death in the United States. Today, we have, as I said, a very multifaceted threat. And the biggest problem we have, I think, is we have a great threat from homegrown Americans who, for one reason or another, have radicalized in favor of ISIS or radicalized in favor of Al Qaeda or many of the Al Qaeda offshoots. And it's very difficult to try and fight a multi hydra headed threat like that, because the people that are trying to harm our society in many cases are members of our society. So I think what the president has to do is he has to realize that the threat has morphed from Al Qaeda Central, which we had about 12 years ago, a centrally directed group led by Osama bin Laden and his compatriots coming out of the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan and the Afghan border, to now a much more lethal threat, not only ISIS and ISIS supporters, but Al Qaeda supporters who are amongst our ranks. To deal with that threat, we have to continue in our surveillance. We have to continue in our law enforcement. We have to continue understanding how social media is used and how individuals are radicalized. And we have to continue to understand how the threat morphs from a place like Syria, where ISIS, or Iraq, where ISIS is located, into a place like Compton, California, or Eureka, California, or Minneapolis, Minnesota. Those are really important things that we have to do to get our arms around that. And I think that the president is going to have to continue to really ramp up the ability of law enforcement and the intelligence community to understand and monitor social media and to track how Americans are radicalized. I think certainly we can't put a bar on immigration. America is a land of immigrants. My grandparents came here from Europe in the turn of the century, last century, and I think one of the things that makes this country great is our diverse population with many different peoples from many different countries with many different skills and gifts. At the same time, we have to be very, very uh, cognizant that individuals may be coming into this country that would do us harm. Not a lot of individuals, maybe very, very few, but we have to continue to fund our Immigration Naturalization Service. We have to continue to fund our Citizens Immigration Service. These are parts of DHS. We have to continue our vigilance to make sure that individuals are monitored as they come in, to make sure that they're not bringing with them a checkered background. They're not bringing with them a criminal history that could possibly come and hurt our citizens. So that's going to be a continuing challenge. At the same time, I would be opposed to a blanket prohibition on immigrants from a certain country or immigrants with an ethnic background or religious background. I don't think that's really keeping with the American spirit. At the same time, though, we have to continue our scrutinization of who's coming in and the backgrounds of those people. Night during the State of the Union, the president, as I expected, was touting the Iranian nuclear arms agreement that was signed earlier this year. I was not a proponent of that agreement. And the reason I wasn't a proponent of that agreement was because I don't trust the Iranian government, not the Iranian people, the Iranian government. This is a rabidly anti Western, anti Israeli, anti American government in Iran. This is a government that, for good or bad, has been hell bent, so to speak, on trying to get a nuclear capability in Iran. This is a country that has funded terrorists, is continuing to fund terrorists, and is involved across the board from Yemen into Syria, into Iraq, into Saudi Arabia, into Bahrain, trying to meddle in the affairs of other countries. Uh, I believe that we've given the Iranians a strategic pause, and that I wouldn't necessarily say I trust them at this point. They are moving fissile material out of Iran, but they're moving it to Russia. So that gives me pause also because I think the Russians also bear some watching. We freed up a lot of money for the Iranians, as you know, billions of dollars of Iranian assets abroad were unfrozen as a result of the signing of this agreement. We've seen recently that the Iranians are still continuing to test missile technology. We've seen the Iranian air defenses and the Iranian Navy continue to challenge U.S. naval vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen some recent firings of missiles close by naval ships, U.S. naval ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very narrow strait in the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf. And we recently saw 10 sailors who were taken by the Iranians allegedly after straying into Iranian waters. Those individuals, U.S. sailors, have been released safely, which we expected that would happen. Um, but I do believe that the Iranians will continue to challenge us, and they will continue to challenge our allies in the Middle East, including the Saudis. There's a Cold War that's been going on for over a decade now between Saudi Arabia, which of course is the leading Sunni Arab nation, and Iran, which is a Shiite nation, a Shiite Islam nation. So there's a religious a struggle. There's a Cold War, a political struggle between these two countries. A lot of the nations in the Middle East are beginning to take up sides, so to speak. And I think the Iranians are still troublemakers in the Middle East, and I think they bear watching. So I'm not particularly supportive of what we've seen. I don't think that the fact that we have got a signature with the Iranians, a signed agreement curtailing their nuclear program, I don't necessarily feel that that's the end game there. I still think the Iranians bear very strict scrutiny, and we have to be very, very vigilant in watching them. Well, I think sanctions should always be available to the United States, especially dealing with the Iranians. The Iranians have had a history going back over a decade of violating UN resolution after UN resolution regarding nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation. If they continue to do that, and I think that there's certainly a fair chance that they may, I think the idea of taking sanctions off the table, um, carte blanche, giving them a carte blanche would be a big mistake. I think we have to always keep that as an element of our national power and the international community's power. Well, I listened to the president's comments last night that the United States military is the strongest military in the world. I don't disagree with that. I think we are the strongest military in the world today. At the same time, in military affairs, nothing is static like life. Everything changes. And certainly, when you have a Navy that is shrinking, that is now smaller than the U.S. Navy was prior to World War I, that'd be 1916, 1917. When you have an Air Force that is flying airframes that are now 40 years old, when you have an Army that is continuing to draw down, I question how long we can maintain the cutting edge as the strongest military in the world. At the same time, I do believe that we see new threats emerging around the world. We see a more aggressive or more adventurous China. They're a growing nation. I certainly expect and understand why they would want to assert more military capability. They just announced that they are now building a second aircraft carrier. Their first aircraft carrier, which was bought from the Russians, is not completely operational for blue water capability, but eventually they will have the ability to be a very strong blue water competitor in the Pacific, which since World War II has been kind of an area of operations that the United States has been superior in. I think we see a resurgent Russia, although the Russians have had and are still going through some severe economic problems at this time. The Russians are convinced that they need to bring back a power, a military power that existed 20 or 30 years ago when they were the former Soviet Union. Again, we see Iran as a local hegemon that wants to grow bigger. So we see greater threats, and we see a changing military environment around the world. Today, we are a strong and the strongest nation. But if we continue in the way that we have been in the last 8 years, by downsizing our military, by cutting our forces, by allowing our airframes and our ships to become old and obsolete, we'll pay the price for that at a future conflict, and that does concern me. Certainly. I listened with great care to what the president said last night with regard to our position in the international community. And I don't particularly agree with him that we are still respected as the world leader in the international community. Earlier, or actually last year, I spent some time in the Middle East, and I spoke to a number of our allies in the Gulf states. And the one consistent message, the one consistent question that was posed to me by individual after individual from the military and from the individuals in the foreign ministry, in the foreign ministries that I was with, was that why is the United States abrogating its power around the world? Why is the United States not leading? Why is the United States not um, living up to its commitments to its allies? That's been the perception, and I think when the perception is that you're no longer at the front of the pack, when you're no longer leading from the front, then other people, other peer competitors will come to the front, and sometimes those competitors are not necessarily friendly competitors. So I don't agree with the president that our strategy of leading from behind has been an effective strategy. I do believe in American exceptionalism. I do believe that we have the ability militarily, and we have the ability as a nation, the ethos of our nation, to lead the world and lead it competently and lead it justly. And while I do agree that we can't be the world's policeman, I think the president was right there. We can't go around and fix every problem in every country. We can't nation build in every country that has a dictator or has a broken form of government. That would be very ruinous to us. We have to still be able to lead and mobilize our allies in coalition forces and not let our allies necessarily take the lead, but because they look to us for leadership. Uh, like it or not, we've been the world's leader since 1945. We have the ability, we have the strength, we have the treasure to do that. And if we abrogate that, certainly someone else will come forward. You know, nature abhors a vacuum, and politics and international security abhors a vacuum. So when the leader of the free world is not there, someone else will take the place, and that might not be the person you want or the nation you want. Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, and have a great day.